Okay, in this video we're going to share with you how we determine the selling price or how we come to realize a selling price of one of the routes, how the company determines financing, and also what you should be looking for when evaluating a seller's representation as far as income accuracy and income documentation. To start off, the companies that offer financing are primarily going to use a different evaluation method. Most people who are used to looking at businesses use multiple of the cash flow. With routes and companies that back them by financing, we use what's called a selling ratio of the weekly sales. So to give you an idea or an example, if a route is doing $520,000 in weekly sales, in yearly sales, that weekly sales average is going to be $10,000. The company is then going to use that $10,000 weekly sales average to determine how much they'll finance. And that may be a ratio from 10 to 1 or 15 to 1, sometimes a little bit higher. In most cases, that's going to be what's called the finance value. We also use another value, and that is the fair market value, and that's based on what other routes have sold for in the area. So you may see a finance value of 15 to 1, but the route's listed at 18 or 19 to 1. And to give you a kind of a comparison, if you were to buy a house, the bank's never going to lend 100% on a home. At least they don't do that anymore. So you're probably going to have to put about 20% down. The bank's going to realize 80% lending value to what the actual sale price is. So that's the difference in the ratios. With determining fair market value, that's a little tricky. It's going to be done on an individual basis, and it's going to be based on other sales in that area. You've heard the term location in real estate, and that's true with business as well. You go to the northeast part of the United States, they're not going to sell for as much as they do, let's say, in the southeast, with exception to New York and New Jersey, which are two completely different animals. As far as evaluating a business, with FedEx Routes, we tend to use, there's no weekly sales average there. It's a different business model. And by the way, FedEx does not recognize any lending to their routes. They don't get involved with the liability or financing of FedEx Routes. So that's up to you to acquire that on your own. And you can see our finance video if you need some money or need to locate some money or access some money. Visit our finance video and you'll get a tutorial of some information on that by clicking on financing here. But with the FedEx route, we're going to use the traditional cash flow times a multiple to determine the selling price. Now, as far as evaluating a business, to date of this video, most of the routes we represent are owner-operator type routes. In other words, not a whole lot of them have employees. Most of them are just the owner who runs the route and operates the day-to-day operations under what is known as a sole proprietorship. When you use a sole proprietorship, it's different from an LLC or corporation, and you are just basically operating under your name and your social security number. So what happens when we have buyers request tax returns, the sellers get a little funny, and for good reason. They're they want to remain a little bit confidential, because essentially when you have a sole proprietorship, you're commingling your personal expenses with your business expenses. And so what they don't want is the potential buyer coming in and seeing their personal expenses or what they're claiming on their taxes. Also, it's worth noting, whenever you buy a business, 99% of the time you're buying a business based on what is known as before tax cash flow. And that means before taxes are filed. In other words, depreciation, things of that nature, loans and things of that nature have not been subtracted out of the cash flow. After tax cash flow is depreciation and the things I mentioned. And that's going to, significantly decrease what the seller is representing as his cash flow, and that's his legal right to do that. I mean, at the end of the day, our obligation is to take advantage of the tax codes and to pay as little taxes as possible. At least any business owner I've ever spoke to, that's their mentality. However, with that said, this is kind of the old dinosaur way of doing business, and these companies are starting to trend towards making everybody incorporate or at least forming an LLC, and that is to protect them from a liability standpoint in case something happens out there in the grocery store, you get in an accident with your vehicle. And it makes sense. With these new trending ways, it should be easier to evaluate tax returns, because then the seller is required to set up a corporation, and so all the expenses should just be business related. So just be wary of that situation if you come across it, whether the owner is operating under an LLC or a corporation, and be advise that we are selling businesses before tax cash flow. So, we're going to add back in, the depreciation and all that to get a more accurate number of what the route is actually doing. Another way to evaluate businesses, and some people want to hear this and some people don't. And if you're a numbers guy, I get it. But I'm not necessarily a numbers guy. I was more concerned with what I was buying, the territory, the contracts, and things of that nature. The numbers, in my opinion, take care of themselves if you're out there actively working the business. With these businesses, they're very, very unique. I got to be honest with you, the expenses are very simple. I tend to come across buyers who are well educated, well informed, and they just over analyze the business and expenses, and it's hard a lot of times for them to process that it's this simple. But the reality is, when you buy an owner operator type route and you're the one working it, you're not paying employees, you're not paying employee payroll, workman's comp, none of that applies. You're basically responsible for fuel, maintenance for your vehicle, insurance, as far as liability insurance, and obviously commercial insurance for your vehicle. You may have a handheld computer expense, $12 to $20 a week, and that will include paper and ink and things of that nature, and that's paid to the company. Some of them, very rarely, you'll be responsible for getting your own warehouse, but a lot of these companies have the centralized warehouse that you just pull product from, and there's no charge to do that. So that's about it when evaluating a business. So if you can use the seller's bank accounts and he can show you receipts of these, very limited expenses, and the gross income is very easy to document. We can get that information from the company. They have reports that will provide this. If you can determine the expenses, that's all you really need to buy an Arnold, a Snyder's route, things of that nature. However, with the FedEx routes, it gets a little bit more complicated. These are going to sell on average for about 3 years of the cash flow if there's employees in place and the owner is a manager of the business. We'll get into that more under FedEx routes. But for the most part, those guys are required to incorporate, and they will have the tax returns if you're one of those buyers who have to absolutely see those numbers. And you go and you believe that tax returns are the Bible to buying a business. I mean, without a problem, you'll be able to see those. So that's just a quick overview of tax returns versus accounts and how we evaluate a business. There are more ways than one to evaluate a business. So don't be fooled just because the seller is a little bit skeptical about selling tax returns. Again, they are selling a business. They do realize that, but some of that is confidential information to them, and some of them are just a little bit funny about it. But we'll do our best to work with you and convince them to share this information with you. So this will conclude our evaluation process, and look forward to speaking with you on the next video.